Evelyn Hartley always believed that working hard and staying out of trouble would be enough to build a solid career and keep her small family safe. At 26, she had already achieved the position of senior accountant at Townsend Holdings, one of Chicago's largest real estate development companies. It was a remarkable accomplishment for someone who had lost both parents in a car accident at 16 and spent the next decade raising her younger sister Lily while working her way through college. What Evelyn didn't expect was that her dedication and sharp eye for detail would put her directly in the crosshairs of a dangerous man, and that her life would change forever on a freezing November night. It all started when Evelyn noticed inconsistencies in the financial reports. Numbers that didn't add up, wire transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, duplicate invoices from contractors that seemed not to exist. At first, she thought they were simple errors, perhaps glitches in the accounting software. But the deeper she investigated, the more disturbing the truth became. Richard Townsend, the charismatic 52-year-old CEO of the company, was siphoning millions of dollars from projects meant for the most vulnerable communities, funds that should have built shelters for hurricane victims, affordable housing for struggling families, and community centers for underprivileged neighborhoods were being funneled into tax havens and Rick's personal investment portfolio. Hello, this is just the beginning of an intense story of survival, unexpected alliances, and dangerous love. If you're enjoying it so far, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share this video with someone who loves intense stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Evelyn spent the next 3 weeks living in two parallel worlds. By day, she was the model accountant, always smiling at her coworkers, always finishing her reports on time, always offering a polite nod whenever Rick Townsend passed her desk with that familiar, fake political smile of his. But at night, when the building began to empty and the last set of footsteps had faded from the hallway, Evelyn became someone else entirely. She printed each document one by one, carefully shielding her screen whenever anyone walked by, her heart hammering in her chest as if it wanted to leap free. She took screenshots of internal emails, of contracts with phantom contractors, of bank statements showing enormous sums flowing toward distant islands she had never even heard named. Everything was saved onto an encrypted USB drive she hid inside the lining of her worn old handbag, the one her mother had given her before she died. Evelyn knew she was playing a dangerous game. She had heard the whispers around the office about Rick's relationship with the mayor of Chicago, about private dinners with the police chief, about generous contributions to the campaign funds of senators. Rick Townsend was not just a wealthy CEO. He was an octopus, with tentacles reaching deep into every corner of Chicago's power. If she wanted to bring him down, she needed proof that could not be denied. She needed enough documentation that even Rick's most powerful friends would not dare defend him. And tonight, the night of the 15th of November, Evelyn believed she finally had enough. The Townsend Holdings building was silent as an abandoned castle. On the 15th floor, only the glow of Evelyn's computer screen remained, washing her face in a pallid blue light. Outside the window, Chicago spread out beneath her like a carpet of illumination, but Evelyn had no mind to admire it. Her eyes were locked on the progress bar, inching slowly across the screen. 80%. She was copying the last files, the most important documents, the evidence that would bury Rick Townsend for good. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. 85%. She glanced at the clock. 11:47 at night. Security would make their rounds at midnight. She had enough time. 90%. Almost there. Just a little more. 95%. Evelyn held her breath. And then she heard it. Footsteps on the marble corridor. Evelyn froze. No one should have been here at this hour. Not security, because it was not yet time for the patrol. Not the cleaning staff, because at night they worked only on the lower floors. The footsteps came closer, unhurried, deliberate, as if the person knew exactly where they were going. 97%. Evelyn's fingers trembled over the keyboard. She quickly minimized the running window and pulled up a random spreadsheet on the screen. She tried to steady her breathing, forcing her face into the calm mask of an employee working late, like so many other nights. 99%. The footsteps stopped, right outside her office door. Evelyn looked up, and her heart seemed to drop into her stomach. Rick Townsend stood there, casting a dense shadow across the doorway. But this was not the Rick Townsend she was used to seeing in meetings or on charity posters. The fake political smile was gone. His eyes were ice cold, sharp as blades, fixed on her with a kind of light that Evelyn could only describe as deadly danger. Rick stepped into the office, and the space seemed to draw tight around Evelyn. He wore a flawless gray suit, the kind she knew cost enough to pay her rent for an entire year. But the elegance on the surface could not hide the dangerous light in his eyes, cold as Lake Michigan in the harshest winter. "Working late again, Evelyn?" Rick's voice was sweet as honey, yet Evelyn could hear the poison tucked behind every syllable. He moved farther into the room, each footfall sounding like the countdown of a bomb. "You're always my hardest worker, always the last to leave, always the most devoted." He stopped beside her desk and looked down at her computer screen with the pleased curiosity of a cat toying with a mouse it was about to tear apart. "But lately I've started to wonder what you're devoted to, or I should say, to whom?" Evelyn fought to keep her voice from shaking. "I don't understand what you mean, Mr. Townsend. I'm just finishing the quarterly report." Rick laughed, a hollow sound with not a trace of warmth. He reached across her, and Evelyn had to use every ounce of strength not to flinch, to keep her hands steady on the keyboard. The hidden window surfaced, the progress bar already complete at 100%. "The quarterly report," Rick repeated, his tone thick with sarcasm. "You know, Evelyn, I have a very capable IT team. They've been monitoring every move you've made for the past 2 weeks, every file you copied, every screenshot you took, every email you sent to that anonymous account." The blood in Evelyn's body seemed to turn to ice. 2 weeks. They had known for 2 weeks. Everything she had done, every careful precaution, had meant nothing. "Did you really think you were smarter than me?" Rick folded his arms across his chest, tilting his head as if he were studying some strange insect. "An orphaned 26-year-old girl, thinking you can bring down an empire I've spent 30 years building?" Evelyn knew she should stay silent. She knew she should beg, she should cry, she should do anything to escape this moment. But when she thought of the children who would be left without roofs, the families with nowhere to shelter after storms, the communities that would keep sinking into poverty while Rick Townsend bought another yacht and another mansion, she could not keep quiet anymore. "You're stealing from the people who need help the most," Evelyn said, her voice trembling not from fear but from outrage. "That money was supposed to build homes for the homeless, schools for poor children. You're a thief, Mr. Townsend. A thief in an expensive suit." For an instant, Evelyn saw something flash in Rick's eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Or anger, but it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a smile so cold it made her skin crawl. "Let me teach you how the world really works." Rick snapped his fingers, and as if it were a signal, 2 enormous figures appeared in the doorway, sealing off Evelyn's only exit. The one in front was a man nearly 2 meters tall, with eyes as cold as dead fish, and a scar running from his temple down to his chin. Victor Kane, head of security at Townsend Holdings, the man who had always filled Evelyn with a restless unease whenever she stood too close to him. Now she understood why. "You know what I like most about idealists like you?" Rick went on, his voice as mild as if he were discussing the weather. "They always have a weakness. And your weakness, my dear Evelyn, is named Lily." Evelyn's heart missed a beat. "Your little sister at Northwestern, right? Dormitory C, room 412. Such a sweet girl. Brown hair, blue eyes, always walking back to her dorm alone after her late evening classes." Rick leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "It would be a shame if something happened to her, wouldn't it?" Evelyn wanted to scream, wanted to lunge forward and claw at that hateful face, but her body felt frozen in place. Lily, her baby sister, the child she had sworn to protect at any cost since the day their parents were gone. Rick smiled, clearly satisfied with her reaction. He gave a slight nod toward Victor, and the giant man began to move toward Evelyn, each heavy step like thunder warning that a storm was about to break. Evelyn tried to scream, but Victor's hand clamped over her mouth before a single sound could slip free. That hand was as big as a shovel, rough, reeking of cigarette smoke and metal. She thrashed wildly, trying to bite into his palm, kicking backward, clawing at anything she could reach, but it was useless. Victor held her as if she were nothing more than a rag doll, without the slightest effort. The other thug grabbed her legs when she kicked too hard, and between the two of them, Evelyn was completely helpless. They dragged her through the empty hallway, past dark offices that by day were packed with employees, past a fire stairwell she had never even noticed existed. Her knees slammed into the steps, sharp pain flaring, but they did not stop. Down 1 floor, 2 floors, 3 floors. Then a steel door burst open, and the cold air of the underground parking garage rushed into her lungs. Evelyn saw it before they threw her inside. A black van with windows tinted so dark they looked like solid shadow, the kind of vehicle she had only ever seen in movies about kidnappings and murders. It sat in the darkest corner of the garage, far from the security cameras, as if everything had been planned in advance. The rear doors swung open, and Evelyn was hurled into the darkness like a bag of trash. Her back hit the van's icy metal floor, pain knocking the breath out of her for several seconds. Before she could react, someone seized her arms, twisted them behind her, and she felt something cinch tight around her wrists. A plastic zip tie. It cut into her skin, burning, and she knew if she struggled more it would only tighten. Then darkness swallowed her whole as a thick cloth was pulled over her eyes and tied so tightly she could not see even the faintest sliver of light. The van started moving. Evelyn lay there on the cold floor, forcing herself to rein in her ragged breathing. She had to stay calm. She had to think. She listened hard, trying to memorize every sound so she could guess where they were taking her. Car horns, music spilling out of bars, the restless noise of the city at night. They were moving through downtown Chicago. She began counting in her head, trying to measure time. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. The noise started to thin. 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Almost complete silence now, nothing but the engine. Then the sound of pavement turned into the crunchy rasp of gravel beneath the tires. They had left the city. Evelyn tried to guess the direction and failed completely. The van turned too many times, sometimes seeming to loop back on itself, as if they wanted her to be utterly disoriented. And they succeeded. She no longer knew where she was. There was only the smell of motor oil, the stink of rusted metal, the sweat of the men who had taken her, and the smell of herself, the scent of pure terror. She did not know how much time passed before the van finally stopped. Half an hour? An hour? Time lost all meaning in the dark. The doors opened, and bitter cold rushed in, carrying the damp, rusty odor of neglect. They hauled her out, her feet touching down on filthy, freezing concrete. They shoved her forward, through what sounded like a metal door screeching on its hinges, into a wide space where each footstep echoed with a hollow ring. Then someone yanked the blindfold away. Evelyn blinked, struggling to adjust to the weak light from a few industrial bulbs. She was in an abandoned warehouse. The concrete walls were peeling, the windows shattered, cobwebs thick in the corners. The air was heavy with mildew and old machine oil. Somewhere outside, she could hear the distant run of a train. The industrial south side of Chicago, she guessed, where no one would hear her even if she screamed until her throat broke. Footsteps sounded behind her, and Evelyn turned. Rick Townsend stepped out of the shadows, his jacket removed, the sleeves of his white shirt rolled up to the elbows, as if he were getting ready to do something filthy. And looking into his cold, emotionless eyes, Evelyn knew that tonight would be the longest night of her life. Rick stopped a few steps away from Evelyn, close enough for her to see every ruthless crease in his face beneath the sickly yellow light. 48 hours, he said, as calmly as if he were announcing a report deadline. I'll give you 48 hours to think about loyalty, about your choices, about consequences. He began to circle her, slow and measured, like a vulture weighing its prey. You know, I've looked into you pretty thoroughly, Evelyn. Into your little sister Lily. She's a sophomore majoring in English literature, right? Dormitory C, room 412. First class at 9 o'clock on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. She has a boyfriend named Jake, who likes to pick her up after class. Rick paused, lowering himself until he was level with Evelyn's eyes. Do you know what happens to beautiful young girls who walk alone at night in Chicago? Evelyn wanted to spit in his face, wanted to scream that if he dared touch Lily she would kill him with her own hands, but she knew that would only make everything worse. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, and she stayed silent. Rick smiled, pleased by her apparent submission. Good. You're learning how to listen. He straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. Oh, and before you start hoping someone will come to save you, let me tell you, all the evidence you collected has been wiped clean. Your USB drive is in my pocket. Your coworkers received an email from you this morning, saying you had to take emergency leave because of a family matter. No one is looking for you, Evelyn. No one. With that, Rick turned and walked away, followed by Victor and the other thug. The steel door slammed shut with a booming clang, and Evelyn heard the lock click from the outside. Then silence. Nothing but her own breathing and the wind whistling through the broken windows high above. The first day passed in quiet despair. Evelyn tried every way to escape. She dragged herself to the door with her hands still bound, shoved with her shoulder, kicked with her feet. Useless. The steel door was thick and securely locked. She looked up at the high windows, at least 4 meters above the ground. Glass shattered, but the bars still intact. No way to reach them. She searched for anything that could serve as a weapon or cut the restraints. But the warehouse had been cleared out, leaving only dust and darkness. Around midday, one of the goons came in, tossed her a bottle of water and a dry piece of bread, as if feeding a dog, then left without saying a word. Evelyn forced herself to eat, even though she felt no hunger at all. She needed strength. She needed to survive. When darkness began to settle through the broken windows, Evelyn sat with her back against the freezing wall, and memories poured in, uncontrollable. She remembered the day of her parents' funeral, 10 years ago. Rain fell as if the whole sky were crying. Evelyn was 16, standing beside 2 coffins, one arm wrapped tight around Lily. Only 9 then, trembling in a black dress too big for her. "I'll protect you," Evelyn had whispered into her sister's ear that day. "I swear, no matter what happens, I will always protect you." And she had kept that promise for 10 years. She would not break it now. The first night was a hell of cold, no blanket, nothing to hold warmth except her thin office clothes. Evelyn curled up in a corner, teeth chattering, unable to sleep for even a single minute, repeating the words in her mind like a mantra. Survive. For Lily. Survive. For Lily. The second day brought Victor Kane and his cruel smile. He came alone, standing over Evelyn with a sick, amused delight. "The boss is losing patience," he said, his voice like gravel grinding together. "If you don't cooperate, maybe I'll have to pay your little sister a visit. I hear she's very pretty." He bent down, his breath thick with cigarettes spilling across Evelyn's face. "Do you know what I do with pretty girls?" Evelyn let tears run down her cheeks, let her body shake, let her voice break as she begged him not to hurt Lily. She acted as if she were completely subdued, completely shattered. But behind her wet eyes, she was watching. She noticed Victor looked at his watch twice in the 10 minutes he was there. She heard vehicles outside, the noise of a shift change. She memorized every smallest detail. And that night, when a guard outside the door spoke too loudly on the phone, she heard the most important information of all. Shift change at 2 o'clock in the morning, 10 minutes for the old shift to leave and the new shift to arrive, 10 minutes when the warehouse was almost unguarded. It was 1:45 in the morning of the second night now. Evelyn sat in the dark, back straight, eyes wide, fixed on the door. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was cold as ice. 15 minutes. She did not know what she would do when the chance came, but she knew she would do something. Anything was better than sitting here and waiting to die. 2:05. Evelyn knew it not because she had a watch, but because she had counted every second, every minute in her mind, since she heard the old shift's vehicles pull away. 5 minutes had passed. The new shift should have arrived. But no one came. She strained her ears, held her breath so she would not miss a single sound. Yet there was only silence, so complete she could hear blood moving inside her own ears. No patrol footsteps, no idle chatter from the guards. Nothing at all. This silence was not normal. It felt heavy, suspicious, as if the whole world were holding its breath, waiting for something. Then Evelyn heard it. The growl of engines. Not one vehicle, but several. At least 3 or 4 by the sound of it. They stopped outside the warehouse, and their engines died almost at the same time. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Rick. He had come back early. The 48 hours were not over, but maybe he had lost patience. Maybe he had decided he did not need her cooperation anymore. Maybe he had come to finish it. She pressed herself into the corner, as if cold concrete could protect her from what was about to happen. Her heart hammered wildly, blood roaring in her ears, but she forced herself to listen. Car doors opening. Footsteps. But something was wrong. These footsteps were different, lighter, yet more purposeful, disciplined, like soldiers moving, not the sloppy shuffle of Rick's hired muscle. Then voices, so low Evelyn could barely catch them, clipped commands, sharp and cold. Not Victor's voice, not the voice of anyone she had heard here before. And then, pff, pff, the muffled spit of suppressed gunfire, a sound she had seen enough movies to recognize. Something heavy hit the ground. 1, 2, 3 times in quick succession. Then silence again, but not the same silence as before. This was the silence of death. Evelyn's heart raced so fast she thought it might burst through her ribs. Who was out there? What was happening? The guards had been taken down. But by whom? A thin spark of hope flared inside her. The police. Maybe someone had realized she was missing, Maybe the FBI had been watching Rick and had finally decided to move. She almost wanted to scream, to call out that she was here, that she needed help, but survival instinct held her in place. The police would announce themselves. They would shout police or FBI before charging in. They would not move in silence like ghosts. They would not use suppressors. The footsteps approached the warehouse door. Slow, steady. Evelyn held her breath. The lock was forced. Metal snapped and cracked. The steel door opened with a long, grating shriek, and light from outside poured in like a blade cutting through darkness. A figure appeared in the doorway. Large, at least 1.80 meters tall. Evelyn could not make out the face because the backlight formed a dark halo around the person. Then a flashlight clicked on and swung straight into her eyes. Evelyn squinted, lifting her bound hands to shield her face. She could see nothing but the blinding glare. Evelyn Hartley? A man's voice, deep and cold as steel, edged with an accent she could not place. Not purely American, maybe Italian, maybe something else from Europe. Evelyn did not answer. She could not. Her throat was dry and bitter, and fear had frozen her voice. She did not know who this man was. She did not know whether he had come to save her or to end her in a different way. She only knew that tonight her fate had just turned onto an entirely new path, and she had no way of knowing whether it led to freedom or deeper into the dark. The beam of the flashlight dipped, and Evelyn could finally see the man standing in front of her. In the few seconds before, she had imagined so many faces: a cold-blooded killer, an old Mafia man with a scarred face, a thug with a crazed stare. But this man looked like none of what she had pictured. He was about 36, at least 1.88 meters tall, with neatly cropped black hair, and eyes the color of steel tempered in fire. Those eyes were cold and sharp, cutting straight through her as if he were reading every thought inside her head. What stunned Evelyn most was what he was wearing. In this filthy warehouse stinking of damp rot, in the dead of night with the guard's blood outside not yet dry on the concrete, this man wore a perfect black suit as if he had stepped out of an upper-class party. Not a single wrinkle, not a speck of dust. So flawless it felt unreal. As he moved closer, Evelyn noticed the scar, a faint but visible line running from his temple down across his left cheekbone, as if someone had tried to slash his face years ago. That scar should have made him look more frightening, yet strangely it made him look dangerous in a way that was hard to describe, almost alluring. This was not a man accustomed to being ordered around. This was a man accustomed to giving orders, and everyone around him obeyed. Evelyn could feel authority radiating from him the way heat radiates from flame. He did not need to raise his voice. He did not need to threaten. His presence alone was enough to make the room seem to shrink. What surprised Evelyn next was what he did. Without another word, the mysterious man knelt beside her and pulled a small knife from his jacket pocket. Evelyn recoiled on instinct, but he did not stab her. Instead, with one decisive, precise motion, he cut the plastic zip tie around her wrists, gentle in a way she did not expect. Careful not to hurt her any more than she already was, Evelyn looked down at her wrists, where red welts still marked the skin, and she did not know how to react. The man stood, removed his coat, and even in the dim light Evelyn could tell it was an expensive designer piece, soft cashmere, that her monthly paycheck could never afford. He draped it over her shoulders without asking, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Warmth spread through Evelyn's shivering body, along with a refined, costly masculine scent, utterly at odds with the warehouse's mildew stench. "Who are you?" Evelyn finally found her voice, though it came out hoarse and weak. "Why did you save me?" The man looked down at her, his gray eyes revealing nothing. "The question isn't why I saved you," he said, his voice low with the Italian accent Evelyn could now clearly hear. "The question is why Rick Townsend was stupid enough to touch someone connected to my work." Evelyn blinked, trying to process what she had just heard. "I'm not connected to anyone. I'm just an accountant." The man tilted his head, and for the briefest moment Evelyn could have sworn she saw something like amusement flicker across those cold eyes. "Now you are." He said it as if it were an unarguable fact, then turned and walked toward the door. "Follow me. We shouldn't stay here long." Evelyn wanted to protest, to demand answers, to understand what kind of madness was unfolding, but her legs rose on their own and carried her after the mysterious man, as if her body had decided that anywhere was better than remaining in this warehouse. When she stepped outside, Evelyn stopped short. 3 bodies lay on the ground, blood spreading into dark pools beneath the weak moonlight. Rick's guards, The men who had tossed bread at her like she was a dog, who had sneered while she shivered in the cold, who had threatened to do terrible things to her sister, now lay still with neat bullet holes centered in their foreheads. Evelyn should have felt fear. She should have been horrified by what she was seeing. But strangely, she felt nothing at all except a hollow emptiness. The man led her to a sleek black car waiting nearby, the rear door already opened by another man in a suit. Clearly a subordinate, he gestured for Evelyn to get in, and she obeyed, too exhausted and too confused to do anything else. When they were both inside and the sedan glided smoothly into the night, the man turned to her. "I'm Dominic Valenti," he said, his voice still cold but carrying something else Evelyn could not read. "And we need to talk about Richard Townsend." Valenti. The name rang through Evelyn's mind like an alarm bell. The Valenti family. She had heard that name before. Who in Chicago had not? The most powerful Italian Mafia family in the city, the ones who controlled everything from gambling to construction, from the docks to the unions. And the man sitting beside her, the man who had killed 3 people without blinking, the man watching her with those ice-gray eyes, was their leader. Evelyn Hartley, an orphan 26-year-old accountant who had only wanted an ordinary life, had been rescued from the claws of one devil, only to fall straight into the arms of another, and she had no idea what this new devil intended to do with her. The car glided smoothly through Chicago's quiet nighttime streets, and Evelyn felt as though she were trapped inside a nightmare she could not wake from. She pressed herself against the door, as far from the man beside her as the tight space allowed, her heart pounding like it meant to break through her ribs. "You're Valenti?" Her voice trembled, so thin she barely recognized it as her own. "The Valenti family, the people." She could not finish the sentence. The people who ran Chicago's underworld, the people even the police treated carefully, the people whose name alone was enough to make strangers shiver. Dominic Valenti did not turn to look at her, his gray eyes fixed ahead as if he were thinking about something far beyond this conversation. "I lead the Valenti family," he confirmed, as casually as if he were talking about the weather. "And before you ask, yes, everything you've ever heard about us is probably true, at least most of it." Evelyn wanted to throw the door open and jump. She wanted to run, to scream, to do anything to escape this moment. But the car was moving at least 80 kilometers an hour on the highway, and she knew, even if she managed it, she would be dead before she hit the ground. "Why?" she asked, the word almost a whisper. "Why did you save me? I have nothing to do with you." Dominic finally looked at her, and in the streetlights sliding past, the scar on his face seemed deeper, more frightening. "Rick Townsend," he said slowly, as if tasting each word. "You think he was only siphoning money from community projects?" Evelyn stayed silent, waiting. "Rick Townsend has been working for me for 5 years, Dominic said, and each word landed like a hammer blow inside Evelyn's head. "He launders money for the Valenti family through Townsend Holdings construction projects, tens of millions of dollars every year. That's why his company grew so fast, why he could buy the mayor and the police chief. With my money." Evelyn felt as if the ground beneath her had vanished. Rick was not just corrupt, he was a mafia errand man. Everything she had known, everything she had believed about Townsend Holdings, had been nothing but the surface of something far darker. "But lately," Dominic continued, his voice dropping a few degrees colder, "Rick became greedy. He started skimming from me, thinking I was too busy to notice, thinking he was smart enough to cheat me." A thin smile appeared on Dominic's mouth, but it held no warmth. It was cold as a blade. "No one cheats me, Miss Hartley. No one. And then I showed up," Evelyn said slowly as the pieces began to lock into place in her mind. "And you watched my investigation." "Exactly." Dominic nodded once. "Rick's IT team wasn't the only one watching you. I have my own people in that company. When I discovered a small accountant quietly digging into exactly what I was looking for, I decided to wait and see." "My investigation was useful to you," Evelyn said, bitterness rising in her throat. "I confirmed what you suspected." "That's right." Dominic showed no remorse. "You did very well, Miss Hartley. Meticulous, careful, leaving no trace. If Rick hadn't had such strong internal monitoring, you might have succeeded." Evelyn gave a dry, wounded laugh. "So I was just a piece on the board, a tool you used to deal with the man who betrayed you. You saved me because I was useful to you." She said it plainly now, no fear left, only a deep exhaustion. "Not entirely," Dominic replied. And for the first time Evelyn heard something else in his voice. Not coldness, perhaps respect. "I saved you because Rick crossed a line. He kidnapped an innocent civilian, threatened your family, meant to kill you simply because you tried to do the right thing. That is something I do not accept." Evelyn studied him, trying to read that face, but it was like stone, giving away nothing. "And what happens next?" Dominic said, his gray eyes holding hers. "Is your choice." Before Evelyn could ask what he meant, the car stopped. She looked out the window and saw a luxurious skyscraper, the kind she had only ever seen in architecture magazines. The door was opened by a man in a black suit, and Dominic stepped out first, then turned back and offered Evelyn his hand. "Welcome to your new home, Miss Hartley," he said, his voice still polite, but leaving no room for refusal. Evelyn stared at the hand held out to her, then up at the towering building, and she understood that whether she wanted it or not, her life had turned onto an entirely new road. She had escaped Rick Townsend's prison, only to step into Dominic Valenti's gilded cage, and she did not know which one was more dangerous. The penthouse sat on the highest floor of the tower, and when Evelyn stepped out of the private elevator, she had to pause for a breath. The apartment opened before her like another world, a world she had only ever seen in films about the ultra-rich. The ceiling soared overhead with expensive abstract paintings, the marble floors gleamed under soft golden light, and an entire wall of glass looked out over Chicago at night. The city stretched beneath her like a glittering carpet of lights, and Evelyn suddenly understood this was the view of people who lived at the top of the world, people like Dominic Valenti. Everything that followed felt like a dream. A private doctor appeared, examined the injuries on her wrists, bandaged them with careful hands, and wrote her a prescription for pain medication. A middle-aged woman with a kindly face led her to a bedroom larger than the apartment Evelyn rented, where new clothes waited in the closet, toiletries were arranged in the bathroom, and a hot meal was set on the table. Evelyn showered, changed, and ate for the first time in nearly 2 days. The food was so good she almost cried, but she did not allow herself to cry. Not yet. Hours later, as the sun began to rise over Chicago's horizon, there was a knock at the door. Dominic walked in, still in that perfect black suit, but with a different tie, as if he had never slept, or had somehow found time to change between killing men and coming here. He sat in the chair across from her, separated by a glass coffee table, and looked at her with gray eyes that gave nothing away. "You've rested," he said, not as a question. "Good. Now we need to talk about your future." Evelyn set her tea down, trying to keep her hand from shaking. "What future?" "You have 2 options," Dominic said, as calmly as if he were reading a restaurant menu. "Option 1. I give you a new identity, a new passport, a new history, a new life. You disappear from Chicago, from America if you want. You never come back. Rick Townsend will never find you." Evelyn swallowed hard. "And Lily? Your sister can come with you, or not. That is your choice." "Option 2? Dominic leaned forward, and his gray eyes sharpened. "You stay, and you help me bring down Rick Townsend." Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. "Work with the Mafia?" "Work with a common enemy," Dominic corrected. "You have evidence of Rick stealing from community projects. I have evidence of him laundering money. Separately, both are dangerous, but not enough. Together, they can bury Rick Townsend forever." "How?" Evelyn asked, suspicion threading her voice. "Through the law," Dominic said, and there was something almost ironic in his tone. "I have people in the FBI, in the prosecutor's office. With your evidence and mine combined, Rick goes to prison. No blood spilled, no bullets flying, everything legal and clean." Evelyn watched him, trying to read what lived behind those steel-colored eyes. "You're a Mafia boss. Why do this legally? Why not just kill Rick the way you killed those guards last night?" "Because killing Rick would create chaos," Dominic answered without hesitation. "He has too many connections, too many people who would ask questions. But if he goes to prison for financial crimes, he's just another corrupt CEO punished by the system. Clean, neat, no one looks in my direction." Evelyn understood. This was not about justice. This was about removing a traitor without dirtying his hands. She was simply a convenient tool. And even knowing that, she could not deny this might be the only chance Rick ever paid the price. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I have one condition." Dominic lifted an eyebrow, clearly not used to being given conditions. "Rick goes to prison, not to the grave. I want him alive, alive in a cell, living with the humiliation of being exposed to the public. I don't want blood on my hands, not even indirectly." A silence stretched between them. Dominic studied her with a look she could not decipher. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps respect, perhaps only calculation. Then he nodded. Agreed. That's it? No argument? You have principles, Dominic said, his voice giving no hint whether he thought that was good or bad. I respect that. He stood and walked to the glass wall, looking out at the city waking under the first light of dawn. But you need to understand one thing, Miss Hartley. Rick won't stop. He will look for you, and if he can't find you, he will look for your sister. Evelyn went rigid. Lily is at Northwestern, Dormitory C, room 412, Dominic said, not turning back. She is safe, for now, but as long as Rick is free, he remains a threat. The only way to protect Lily permanently is to put Rick behind bars. It was not a threat. Evelyn could hear that in his voice. It was truth, cold and ruthless, but still truth. She looked down at her hands, the red marks from the restraints still bright on her wrists. She thought of Lily, of her smile, of the promise Evelyn had sworn 10 years ago beside their parents' graves. Then she lifted her head and looked straight at the back of the man standing by the window. I agree. Dominic turned, and for the first time Evelyn saw a real smile on his mouth. Small, almost imperceptible, but real. Welcome to the Alliance, Miss Hartley. Evelyn did not smile back. She had shaken hands with the devil to destroy another devil. She only hoped she would not be burned in the process. A week passed inside Dominic Valenti's penthouse, and Evelyn began to realize that everything she had ever believed about the Mafia was wrong, or at least not entirely true. She had imagined men with guns hanging at their hips, secret meetings in dim rooms thick with smoke, conversations about drugs and murder, but reality looked nothing like that. The people coming and going through the penthouse each day were not hard-faced gangsters. They were attorneys in three-piece suits, businessmen carrying expensive leather cases, and now and then faces Evelyn recognized from local political news. Dominic received them in his office with the door always closed. Yet when she happened to pass by, she could hear his voice, calm and authoritative, like a chief executive running a multinational corporation rather than a criminal empire. What surprised Evelyn most was the way Dominic treated the people who worked for him. There was no shouting, no threats. When a servant dropped a tray of tea, the young woman shook like she was about to cry. But Dominic only looked at her and said evenly, "It's all right. Clean it up and be more careful next time." That was all. The girl nearly collapsed with relief, and Evelyn found herself wondering what the woman's previous employer must have been like if a normal response could make her feel grateful to that extent. On the fourth day, Evelyn stumbled upon the library. It was a wide room lined with shelves that rose to the ceiling, holding thousands of books she could see at a glance. She walked along the aisles, fingertips gliding over spines, and she was stunned by what she found. Ancient Greek philosophy, Roman history, modern economics, Russian literature, Italian poetry. This was not the collection of an uneducated killer. This was a scholar's library. She pulled out a thin volume bound in worn leather, and almost dropped it when she realized it was a Latin edition of Marcus Aurelius, with handwritten notes in black ink in the margins. Notes in Latin. "You like Aurelius?" Evelyn startled and turned. Dominic stood in the doorway, one shoulder against the frame, gray eyes watching her with a quiet, mild curiosity. "I can't read Latin," she admitted, sliding the book back into place. "But you can. My father believed a powerful man needs to understand history so he doesn't repeat other people's mistakes," Dominic replied, his voice giving nothing away. "He hired tutors to teach me Latin, Greek, and ancient history from the time I was 7. He said nothing more, only turned and walked away, leaving Evelyn standing there with more questions than answers. On the 5th night, when Evelyn could not sleep and wandered through the darkened penthouse, she heard a piano. The sound was gentle, mournful, drifting through the hallway like the whisper of a lonely soul. She followed it and stopped at a doorway, and there she saw Dominic seated at a grand piano, moonlight from the window washing his face as his fingers moved across the keys. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. She stood there, not daring to breathe, not daring to move, only listening. And in that music she heard what Dominic never allowed to show on his face: sorrow, loneliness, a pain so deep he kept it hidden behind steel. On the 7th day, Evelyn got lost. The penthouse was too large, with too many hallways, and she opened the wrong door, thinking it was the reading room. It was a small room, almost empty, with only a table holding a few framed photographs. Evelyn stepped inside, curiosity drawing her forward, and she looked at the pictures. A beautiful woman with black hair and warm eyes, a smile gentle as spring sunlight. A boy of about 10, bright-faced, grinning wide beside a younger Dominic, maybe in his early 20s, no scar on his face yet, looking at the boy with a tenderness Evelyn had never once seen on him. "My mother and my little brother." Evelyn spun around, heart stuttering. Dominic stood in the doorway, his face blank, but his eyes, as he looked at the photographs, held a grief Evelyn could feel as if it were her own. "They're gone," he said, his voice low and distant. Then he turned and walked away, offering no explanation, giving her no chance to ask. But Evelyn did not need one. She looked back at the photographs, at the woman's smile and the child's joy, and she understood. Dominic Valenti, the cold Mafia boss, the man who killed without blinking, was also a man who had lost everyone he loved, just like her. And for the first time since she had come here, Evelyn saw Dominic not as a devil, but as a human being, complicated, dangerous, yet deeply wounded, and that, in a strange way, was far more frightening than if he had been nothing but evil. That night, Evelyn could not sleep. The images from the small room haunted her, the smile of the beautiful woman, the clear, bright gaze of the boy, and a younger Dominic with a face untouched by scars, untouched by the weight of a criminal empire on his shoulders. She sat up, pulled on the sweater the staff had left for her, and stepped out onto the balcony. The Chicago night air was biting cold, but she needed it to stay awake, to stop thinking about what she should not be thinking about. She slid the glass door open and walked outside, then stopped short when she realized she was not alone. Dominic was already there, leaning against the railing, looking down at the city spread beneath him like a carpet of light. He was not wearing a suit for once, only a white shirt with the top few buttons undone, sleeves rolled to his elbows. It was the first time Evelyn had seen him look like an ordinary man instead of a powerful boss. She started to turn back inside, but Dominic spoke without looking at her. "You can't sleep either?" Evelyn hesitated, then stepped farther out, stopping a few paces away, looking down at the city with him. "I have a lot on my mind." "You found my mother's room." It was not a question. Evelyn nodded, even though she knew he was not watching. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." "It's all right," Dominic said evenly. "That's the past. I keep that room to remind myself what I've lost, and why I do what I do." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the wind and the distant murmur of a city that never slept. Evelyn knew she should stay quiet, should go back to her room and pretend this conversation had never happened. But one question had haunted her since the first day she met him, and she could not hold it back anymore. "The scar on your face," she said softly. "Where did it come from?" Dominic finally turned to look at her, and in the dim light rising from the city below, his gray eyes looked like two bottomless wells. Evelyn thought he would not answer, that he would send her away or brush it off the way he had with every other personal thing, but he did not. "My father," Dominic said, his voice flat, as if he were talking about the weather. "He was the boss before me, a brutal man, cold, convinced that weakness was an unforgivable sin." He paused, looking down at his hands. "I was 10. There was an important meeting with our allies, and my father wanted me to witness it. One of the men said something about my mother, something humiliating. I don't remember the exact words, but I remember the feeling, my blood boiling." Evelyn held her breath, afraid to interrupt. "I was supposed to stay silent. That was the rule. Children don't speak in grown men's meetings. But I couldn't stand it. I said he should apologize to my mother." A bitter trace of a smile crossed Dominic's mouth. "My father waited until the meeting was over. Then he took a knife and cut my face, from my temple down across my cheek, in front of all the servants. He said it was a lesson about weakness, that a Valenti man never lets emotion dictate his actions." Evelyn felt as if someone had tightened a fist around her heart. 10 years old, he had been only a 10-year-old boy trying to defend his mother. "My mother cried for 3 days after that," Dominic went on, his voice distant. "She was the only person in my life who loved me without conditions, and my little brother, Antonio." The name softened his voice until it was nearly a whisper. "Antonio was killed in a gang war when I was 25. I swore I would protect him, the way you swore you'd protect Lily, but I failed. My mother couldn't bear it. She died 6 months later from heart disease. But I know the truth. She died of a broken heart." Silence settled over the balcony. Evelyn did not know what to say, did not know if there were any words large enough to touch pain like that. "Finally," she asked, very gently, "your father wanted you to become a monster. Did you become one?" Dominic looked at her. And for the first time, Evelyn saw something other than coldness in his gray eyes. Maybe pain, maybe exhaustion, or maybe only raw honesty. "My father wanted me to become a monster," he said. "I refused." "Then what are you?" A long pause passed before Dominic answered. "Maybe a necessary evil, or just a man trying to do terrible things for reasons he believes are right. I don't know anymore. Sometimes the line between necessary and cruel gets so blurred I can't tell the difference." Evelyn watched him and saw herself. Both of them had lost their parents. Both of them had been forced to grow up too fast, carrying burdens no one should have to carry. Both of them were lonely in ways other people would never understand. Dominic turned back to her, and the gray in his eyes softened slightly under the moonlight. "You're the first person in years who has looked at me without fear." Evelyn tilted her head. "Should I be afraid?" Dominic studied her, and in that moment the steel wall he kept around himself seemed to crack just a little. "Of me?" he said, his voice low and gentle. "No, never." They stood there in silence, two wounded people staring out at a city that never slept, and neither of them spoke again. Nothing happened that night. No kiss, no confession, nothing romantic the way it happens in movies. But when Evelyn finally went back inside, she knew something had changed between them. Some invisible thread had connected, and she had no idea where it would lead. 2 days after that balcony conversation, Dominic took Evelyn to meet Sofia Mendez, and they sat across from each other in a small law office on Chicago's North Side, housed in an old, unremarkable building that gave nothing away from the street, yet inside was outfitted with modern technology and a security system Evelyn could tell cost more than the building itself. Sofia was a woman around 45, her dark hair threaded with silver and pinned neatly at the back of her head, her eyes sharp as a blade, and when she shook Evelyn's hand, her grip was firm enough to signal confidence without crossing into force, the kind of handshake worn by someone who had faced people far more powerful than Evelyn and never once flinched. "I'm Sofia Mendez," she said, warm but professional. "Former federal prosecutor. Now I specialize in protecting whistleblowers. Mr. Valenti told me about your situation, and I have to say, you're very brave, Miss Hartley." Evelyn did not feel brave. She felt tired and afraid. Still, she nodded and sat where Sofia indicated, and for the next 2 hours she told everything. The first irregularities she noticed in the financial reports, the nights she spent gathering proof, the moment Rick appeared in her office, and what followed after. Sofia listened without interrupting, occasionally writing notes in a tiny, tight handwriting Evelyn could not read, and when Evelyn finally finished, Sofia leaned back and studied her with an expression Evelyn could not quite decipher. "You said Rick deleted all the evidence," Sofia said slowly. "But I need to ask, do you have a backup anywhere? Any copy at all?" Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "I have an encrypted email account on a server in Iceland. Every night, I sent copies of what I collected that day to it. Rick doesn't know about it. His IT department only caught the emails I sent from the company computer, not the ones I sent from my personal phone over the cellular network." For the first time since the meeting began, Evelyn saw Dominic smile, a small smile, almost imperceptible, but real. "Smart," he said, and there was a note of respect in his voice. Sofia nodded too, clearly impressed. "Very smart. With that evidence, we can do a great deal." She stood and moved to the window. "I have a contact in the FBI, Agent Marcus Webb. He's been tracking Rick Townsend for 3 years, but he never had enough to move. Rick has people inside the Chicago Police Department. Every local investigation leaks before it can go anywhere." She turned back to Evelyn. "With your evidence, Marcus can finally nail Rick Townsend. I'll arrange a meeting." The meeting with Marcus Webb took place 2 days later at a secure location Evelyn was not told about until the last possible moment. Agent Webb was a black man around 48, tall and solid, with intelligent eyes and the worn exhaustion of someone who has fought too long without ever seeing a win. And when Evelyn opened the files from her encrypted email and showed them to him, those tired eyes brightened as if someone had handed him a Christmas gift. "With this," Marcus said, his voice nearly a whisper with feeling, "we can finally nail him. 3 years, Miss Hartley. 3 years I followed Rick Townsend, knowing he was a criminal and not being able to do a damn thing, and now you've given me exactly what I needed." Dominic, who had been silent through most of it, finally spoke. "I can provide additional evidence about Rick's laundering through certain shell companies." Marcus looked at him with guarded eyes, and for a tense moment, the two men held each other's gaze like predators measuring risk. Then Marcus nodded, slow and deliberate. "I understand," he said carefully, "and I assume this evidence will pertain only to Richard Townsend, not to anyone else." "Exactly," Dominic replied, his voice unreadable. "Rick is a traitor. No one else is part of this investigation." Evelyn watched them and understood the unspoken bargain taking shape in the air. The FBI would not pursue the Valenti family. In exchange, they would be handed Rick Townsend on a silver platter. It was not perfect justice, but it was reality. In the weeks that followed, everything began to lock into place. Sophia worked with Marcus to build the case against Rick. Evelyn spent hours reviewing evidence, translating complex financial transactions into clear explanations for people who did not live and breathe accounting. And Dominic, somehow, was always there. He did not sit in the legal meetings, but each evening, when Evelyn returned to the penthouse, he would ask about progress, listen as she spoke through the obstacles, and sometimes offer suggestions so sharp they startled her. They began eating dinner together, not dates, just two people sitting across from each other in a vast dining room, talking about the case, about books, about music, about things that had nothing to do with the Mafia or crime, and Evelyn could not say when she began to look forward to those dinners, only that she did. What she did not know was that every day Dominic received reports from a team of 4 men he had stationed at Northwestern, tracking Lily around the clock, making sure the girl was safe without ever letting her know she was being protected. Dominic did not tell Evelyn, partly because he did not want her carrying one more weight, and perhaps because he did not want to admit to himself that he cared about her sister more than a business arrangement required. The plan had taken shape. The evidence was ready. Marcus Webb was confident they had enough to convict Rick without needing anything more. Everything was moving perfectly, almost beautifully, and in Evelyn's experience, when things became too perfect, it was usually the first warning that a storm was coming. The storm came faster than Evelyn had imagined, and only 3 days after the final meeting with Marcus Webb, everything began to collapse, because Rick Townsend had discovered she was still alive, and Evelyn did not know how. Maybe it was an informant inside the FBI, maybe one of Rick's corrupt ties in the Chicago police, or maybe it was simply that money could buy any piece of information if you paid enough. But the important thing was that Rick knew, and he knew she was with Dominic Valenti. The first strike came at 3 o'clock in the morning, when Sofia Mendez's office went up in flames in the dark, a savage fire swallowing every file and every document, and nearly Sofia herself if she had not kept the habit of working late in a coffee shop instead of at her office. And when Evelyn saw the news on television the next morning, the building was nothing but a blackened heap of ash, and she understood it was not an accident at all. It was a declaration of war. The second strike came the next day, and this time it came straight for her, because Evelyn was on her way to meet Marcus Webb at a secure location, when the car carrying her was forced to a stop, and everything happened too fast. Gunfire, glass exploding, the driver screaming, and Evelyn remembered little after that except the sensation of someone shoving her down to the floorboards and covering her with their body, and then the answering gunfire from Dominic's men. And when the noise finally died and she lifted her head, she saw Dominic beside her with blood seeping through the shoulder of his white shirt, because he had been in the escort vehicle behind them, and when the attack began he had run to her car and used his own body as a shield. Evelyn shouted that he was hurt, her hands shaking as she tried to press the wound, and Dominic spoke through clenched teeth that it had only grazed his shoulder, and he had endured far worse. The third strike was aimed at Marcus Webb, whose vehicle was rigged with a bomb, and only a strange twist of timing kept him alive, because Marcus had stopped to buy coffee, and the explosion tore through the car while he was still 10 meters away, leaving him with minor injuries from flying glass. But if he had been inside, he would have died. Rick Townsend was spiraling, and he no longer cared about hiding, but the worst had not arrived yet, and it came on the 4th night in the form of a message that appeared on Evelyn's phone, a phone number known only to Lily and Sophia, the message containing a link to a site on the dark web, and when Evelyn tapped it she nearly collapsed, because it was a photograph of Lily walking across the Northwestern campus, brown hair lifting in the wind, an innocent smile resting on her mouth, and beneath the image were the words, "Pretty little thing, isn't she?" And then another message appeared immediately after, telling her to come back to him or her sister would disappear, and that she had 24 hours. Evelyn could not remember whether she screamed or cried or both, only the sensation of the ground dropping away beneath her, as if the world itself were falling apart around her, because it was Lily, her baby sister, the child she had sworn to protect at any cost, and she had to go. She had to go back to Rick. She had to save Lily. And she said she had to leave, as her trembling hands reached for her coat, that going back to him was the only way. Dominic appeared in her doorway, his shoulder still bandaged, his face cold as ice, but his gray eyes burning with a fire she had never seen in them before, and he told her no, that she was not going anywhere, and Evelyn shouted through tears that he did not understand, that it was her sister, that if she did not return Rick would kill her, and Dominic answered without raising his voice, only hardening it, that if she went back Rick would win, and he would kill them both, that she truly believed he would release Lily after she surrendered herself, when she was a lethal threat now, when she knew too much, when he would never let her live and would never let any witness live either. Evelyn wanted to fight him, to rage at him for not understanding that this was Lily, that she could not stand still and do nothing. But deep down she knew he was right, and Dominic stepped closer and told her the only way Lily would be safe permanently was for Rick to go to prison, or to the grave, and that those were the only choices, and Evelyn broke on the words that Lily was in danger right now, that how could she, and Dominic cut her off with a certainty that stopped her cold, saying Lily was safe, and had been safe since the first day Evelyn came here. Evelyn stared at him, not understanding, and Dominic told her he had assigned 4 men to watch her sister around the clock from the moment Evelyn agreed to work with him. That Lily did not know they were there, but they never took their eyes off her, that the photo Rick had obtained was an older one taken secretly before Dominic's men arrived, and that right now Lily was in a safe house 50 miles from here, protected by the best men Dominic had. Evelyn felt her knees threatening to give way as the words "Lily is safe" settled into her bones. She asked why in a voice that was barely a whisper, why he had done it, why he cared about her sister. And Dominic was silent for a long time, his gray eyes fixed on her with an emotion she could not read, and then he spoke in a low voice threaded with pain, saying it was because he had failed to protect his own brother, and he would not fail again. Evelyn looked at him, the man who killed without blinking, who built a criminal empire, who lived his life in shadow, and she saw a person who had lost everyone he loved and was trying to atone by protecting the people she loved, and Dominic asked her to trust him, almost like a plea, something she never thought she would hear from him, promising they would bring Rick down and they would protect Lily, but she had to trust him. Evelyn searched those gray eyes for deceit, for any reason not to believe, and found nothing but raw sincerity, so she nodded slowly and told him she trusted him, and in that moment she understood she was not only placing Lily's safety in Dominic's hands, she was placing her own heart there too. That night, the penthouse went into full lockdown. Dominic's men stood guard at every entrance and exit. The security cameras were reinforced, and no one was allowed outside until further orders. Evelyn lay on the bed but could not sleep, her mind spinning with images of Lily, with the crack of gunfire, with blood seeping through Dominic's shirt at the shoulder. She got up and wandered through the dark penthouse, bare feet on ice-cold marble, trying to find something, anything, that might distract her from the chaos in her head. She found Dominic in his office. The door was ajar, and through the narrow opening she saw him sitting in a chair, his shirt already off, trying to bandage the wound on his shoulder with one hand. His movements were awkward, the gauze not wrapped tight enough, and Evelyn could see blood still seeping through the white cloth. She pushed the door open and walked in without knocking. "Where's the doctor?" Dominic lifted his head to look at her, gray eyes tired but still sharp. "I sent him home. It's just a scratch. No need to make a scene." "A scratch doesn't bleed like that," Evelyn said, stepping closer. "Let me help." Dominic opened his mouth to object, but Evelyn was already seated beside him, gently taking the roll of bandage from his hand. She did not give him the chance to refuse. She began to unwind the old dressing, careful not to touch the wound. The bullet had grazed his shoulder, deep enough to bleed heavily but not enough to do serious damage. Evelyn cleaned the blood away with antiseptic-soaked gauze, and she felt the muscle under her hands tighten when the sting hit the raw flesh. Yet Dominic did not so much as make a sound. When she started wrapping the fresh bandage, her fingertips brushed his skin by accident, and it felt like a current of electricity ran through her. She looked up and found Dominic watching her, his gray eyes darker than usual, holding something she did not dare name. Suddenly his hand closed around her wrist, stopping her from continuing. Not hard, just firm enough to hold her still. "You should hate me," Dominic said, his voice low and rough. "I'm everything you should stand against. A criminal, a killer, a monster in the stories people tell to scare children." Evelyn looked into his eyes, at the scar on his cheek, at the hand holding hers with a gentleness that contradicted everything he had just said about himself. "Maybe I should hate you," she said slowly. But you're also the man who saved me. You protected my sister when you had no obligation to. You used your body to shield me from bullets." She stopped and drew a deep breath. How can I hate someone like that? Dominic closed his eyes for a moment, as if her words hurt him more than the wound in his shoulder. "When this is over," he said, almost a whisper, "you should leave, build a normal life. Forget me." "What if I don't want to forget?" Evelyn asked, and she was startled by the courage in her own voice. Dominic opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Then his hand released her wrist and, instead, rose to her face. Lightly, tenderly, so soft she almost could not feel it, as if she were made of glass, and he was afraid she would shatter if he used even a little too much force. "You deserve more than a man like me," he said, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "You deserve a normal life, with a normal man, someone who can take you to a movie on a Friday night and meet your family on Thanksgiving without worrying that someone will try to assassinate them." "Let me decide what I deserve," Evelyn whispered, leaning into his palm. The distance between them narrowed. Evelyn could feel Dominic's warm breath on her lips, could see the gray of his eyes darkening as he looked down at her mouth. She closed her eyes and waited, but the kiss did not come. Instead, Dominic stopped, only millimeters from her lips, his breathing heavy and uneven. "Not like this," he said hoarsely. "Not when you might be feeling gratitude instead of something real." He pulled back, his hand leaving her face and taking the warmth with it, leaving a cold emptiness behind. Evelyn opened her eyes and looked at him, and she saw torment on his face, an inner war between what he wanted and what he believed was right. "When this is over," Dominic said, rising and moving to the window with his back to her. "When you're safe, and you don't need me anymore, if you still want to, we'll talk." He said nothing else, and neither did Evelyn. She stood and left the room, her heart thundering in her chest. They did not kiss that night. Nothing more happened. But when Evelyn lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling in the dark, she knew one thing for certain. She was in love with Dominic Valenti. She loved the man she was supposed to hate, the most dangerous man she had ever met, the man with blood on his hands and a broken heart, and that, Evelyn thought as tears slipped silently into her pillow, might be the craziest thing she had ever done in her life. 3 days later, Marcus Webb called an emergency meeting. Even with Sophia's office reduced to ashes, even with his own car nearly turned into a coffin, the FBI agent did not back down. If anything, the attacks only hardened his resolve. They met at a safe house in the Chicago suburbs, and Marcus laid out the situation with a grave face. The evidence they had was enough to charge Rick with embezzlement and money laundering. But Rick's attorneys were too good, and his connections ran too deep, and they needed one more thing to guarantee a clean, total win. They needed Rick to confess, on tape, in front of witnesses, and the only person who could draw that confession out of him was Evelyn. The plan was built with meticulous care. Evelyn would contact Rick and say she wanted to negotiate. She would meet him at an upscale restaurant in downtown Chicago, public enough that Rick could not make a move immediately. She would wear a recording device hidden inside her jewelry, and her job was to coax Rick into boasting, to push him into admitting what he had done. The FBI would be close, ready to move the moment they had what they needed. Dominic objected at once. "It's too dangerous," he said, his voice hard as steel. "Rick isn't stupid. He'll suspect it. He'll search you. And if he finds the recorder, he'll kill you on the spot, no matter how many people are around." "So, do you have another plan?" Evelyn asked, meeting his eyes without blinking. "Let me handle it my way," Dominic said, his gray eyes darkening. Evelyn knew what he meant. A bullet, an accident, Rick Townsend gone for good with no proof and no questions. "No," she said, her voice firm. "This is my fight. I started it, and I'm going to finish it. My way." The room fell into tense silence. Marcus looked from one of them to the other, clearly unwilling to step between them. Sophia sat still, waiting. "If anything happens to you," Dominic began, but Evelyn cut him off. "Then make sure nothing happens," she said. "You have people all over Chicago. Use them to protect me instead of trying to stop me." Dominic's jaw tightened, the muscle standing out beneath his skin. "I'll kill anyone who touches you." "I don't want you to kill anyone," Evelyn said, stepping closer. "I want Rick in prison. I want him rotting behind bars, stripped of money, power, reputation. I want him alive to watch his empire collapse. Death is too easy for someone like him." A long pause stretched out. Then Dominic nodded, slow and reluctant. The meeting ended. and everyone began preparing for tomorrow. That night, before Evelyn stepped into the car that would take her to the restaurant, Dominic came to her. He did not speak at first, only took her hand and placed a small ring in her palm. Simple, silver, nothing special to look at. "There's a GPS tracker inside," he said quietly, "so I can always find you, wherever you are." Evelyn looked at the ring, then up at him, and before she could think, before she could stop herself, she reached up, pulled him down, and kissed him. It was short, only a few seconds, but it held everything they had not said over the past weeks: fear, longing, pain, and love. That wild, impossible love that was still more real than anything Evelyn had ever felt. When they broke apart, Dominic stared at her, his eyes dark with emotion. "Come back to me, Eve," he said hoarsely. "Promise me." "I promise," she whispered. Then she turned, climbed into the car, and headed toward the final battle of her life. Le Bernardin sat on the top floor of a luxury building in downtown Chicago, the kind of place where one dinner cost what Evelyn paid in rent for an entire month. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, the chairs were upholstered in deep red velvet, and paintings worth millions of dollars hung on the walls. This was the territory of the powerful, the kind of room where Rick Townsend surely felt like a king inside his own kingdom. Evelyn walked in at exactly 8 o'clock, her heart beating like war drums while her face stayed calm as a still lake. She wore a simple black dress Dominic had prepared for her, elegant enough not to look out of place in a restaurant like this, and around her neck hung the necklace containing the tiny recording device Marcus Webb had given her. Dominic's ring rested on her finger, warm and steady, a reminder that she was not alone. Rick was waiting at a VIP table near the window, gazing out over Chicago at night, as if he were surveying his realm. He wore an expensive gray suit, his hair slicked back, and that fake political smile had returned to his face as if what he had done to Evelyn in that warehouse had never happened at all. Victor Kane stood a few steps away, his back against the wall, eyes as cold as dead fish, never leaving Evelyn for a single second from the moment she entered. She felt that stare like a blade pressed to the back of her neck. "Evelyn." Rick rose as she approached, his voice sweet as if greeting an old friend. "You look wonderful." Sit. I already ordered your favorite wine." She had no idea how he knew what her favorite wine was, and it sent a shiver through her, but she forced herself to sit, forced herself to smile, forced herself into the role of a woman who had been broken. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," Evelyn said, her voice trembling just enough, partly performance, partly real fear. "I've been thinking a lot, and I think we can find an arrangement." Rick leaned forward, his eyes glittering with the victory he was certain was already his. "I always knew you were a smart girl, Evelyn. Far too smart to fight me." "I just want to know." Evelyn hesitated, pretending to search for words. "I want to know who I'm dealing with. I mean, how powerful you really are. How do I know that if I cooperate, I'll be safe?" Rick laughed, the smug laugh of a man who never doubts his own power. "You want to know how powerful I am?" He leaned back, swirling his wineglass. "I'm untouchable, Evelyn. The mayor of Chicago, he owes me his seat. The police commissioner, I pay his kids' college tuition. Half the city council, they eat out of my hand." He tilted his head, his smile widening. "You think that's why no one has ever been able to touch me? Because I'm not just rich, Evelyn. I own the people with power." Evelyn nodded, forcing an impressed expression while her stomach turned. "And the money from the community projects, where does it go?" "Where it should go," Rick said with a dismissive wave, as if talking about something trivial. "Those flood victims, they don't need charity houses. They need to learn how to help themselves. I'm just putting that money in places where it's more useful. Real estate in the Caymans, stocks in Singapore, things that actually earn." Evelyn bit her lip to keep from screaming at him. She thought of families without roofs after storms, children without schools, communities dying slowly for lack of resources, and the man sitting across from her had stolen their future to buy another yacht. "And my sister," Evelyn said, her voice dropping. "You said you would?" "Ah, Lily." Rick nodded, and something darkened in his gaze, in a way that made Evelyn want to reach across the table and tear his face apart. "You know, I was going to sell her. There are buyers who pay a very high price for pretty college girls, especially the ones without powerful families to come looking for them." Evelyn's blood boiled. She had to use every ounce of strength not to jump across the table and wrap her hands around his throat. But she needed more. She needed him to say it clearly. So you... But she never finished the question. Victor Kane suddenly appeared at Rick's side, bending to whisper something in his ear. Evelyn watched Rick's expression change in an instant, from smug to furious to ice cold. "Nice try, Evelyn," Rick said, and his voice was no longer sweet, only raw cruelty. "You really think I wouldn't have this restaurant swept before you arrived?" Victor placed a small object on the table, the recording device from her necklace. Evelyn's heart dropped into her stomach. "I'll give you this. You've got guts," Rick said as he stood, calmly buttoning his vest. "But you're also stupid, and now you're going to pay for that stupidity." He nodded toward Victor. "Take her out the back. We're leaving." Evelyn tried to shout, tried to fight, but Victor's massive hand clamped around her arm, pressing something hard into her side that she knew was a gun. He smiled, cruel and pleased. "Make a sound, and this bullet goes through your spine before anyone even turns their head." Evelyn looked around in desperation as Victor dragged her toward the back, through the busy kitchen, where no one dared look up, through a steel door that opened onto a dark alley behind the building. The FBI was out at the front of the restaurant, hundreds of meters away. They would not make it in time. No one would. Victor dragged Evelyn through the steel door and into the dark alley behind the restaurant, the Chicago night air knifing into her face, yet she could barely feel it because fear was tightening around her throat like a fist. And a black SUV was already waiting, its engine rumbling in the shadows as Victor shoved her into the back seat with brutal force that sent her head cracking against the door frame. And before she could even gather herself, Rick slid in beside her while Victor lunged into the driver's seat, and the SUV shot forward like a bullet. Somewhere behind them, Evelyn heard shouting, the bark of FBI radios, other engines roaring to life. Marcus Webb realizing something had gone wrong, but they were out front, hundreds of meters away from the rear alley. Too far, too late, and Rick screamed at Victor to drive, his face flushed with rage as Victor slammed the accelerator, and the SUV tore through Chicago at a mad speed, streetlights smearing into long streaks outside the window, horns blaring as they ran red lights, nearly clipped a taxi, and whipped around a corner so hard Evelyn was thrown sideways, and Rick turned on her with eyes wild as a cornered animal, spitting that she had ruined everything he had built, 30 years, demanding to know who she thought she was to stand against him, and then his hand struck her, hard enough to snap her head aside and leave her ear ringing. But Evelyn did not cry, and she did not beg, and when she turned back, she spat straight into Rick's face and told him, her voice shaking yet defiant, that she was the one who would put him in prison. And Rick wiped his cheek, and for a heartbeat Evelyn thought he would kill her right there in the back seat of a vehicle flying at 120 kilometers an hour, but before he could move, Victor shouted from the front that they had a tail, 2 FBI vehicles behind them, and Evelyn twisted to look through the rear glass and saw the blue and red lights flashing through the night. The FBI closing in, yet there was something else too, a black car without police lights running alongside them in the left lane. And Evelyn recognized it at once, Dominic's Bentley, and Victor yelled again that there was another car, not the FBI, Valenti, while Rick cursed and looked left and ordered Victor to go faster, to lose them. But Chicago streets were not a racetrack, traffic lights and cars and pedestrians turning into obstacles in a chase that had become pure insanity, and Dominic gave them no room to breathe as the Bentley surged forward and slammed into the SUV's side, forcing them right. Victor losing control for a second as the SUV fishtailed, smashed through a barrier, and shot into a narrow alley. Victor screaming for them to move, but at the end of the alley was a brick wall, and he hit the brakes, tires shrieking, yet momentum was too great, and the SUV slammed into the wall with a sickening crash, glass exploding, metal folding, Evelyn thrown forward so hard her head struck the front seat, the world spinning for several seconds before it steadied, and she felt blood running from her forehead, but she was alive. And then the door beside her was yanked open, and Victor, his face smeared with blood from a cut on his brow, hauled her out, locking an arm around her throat and pressing a gun to her temple, shouting for everyone not to move. And Evelyn saw they were surrounded. On one side, FBI vehicles had arrived, and Marcus Webb and other agents crouched behind their cars with weapons trained on them. And on the other, Dominic's men were there too, men in black suits holding their guns with cold professional stillness, while Rick crawled out of the crumpled wreck, his face bloody, and one leg looking broken. And even then he was rabid, screaming at Victor to kill her now. And Victor tightened his grip on Evelyn's neck, the barrel cold and unforgiving against her skin, as he screamed that if anyone took another step, she would die. And then Evelyn saw him. Dominic stepping out from behind the Bentley, terrifyingly calm in the chaos, not running, not shouting, simply walking with the confidence of a man who had faced death too many times to blink, a pistol in his hand and those steel-gray eyes locked on Victor Kane. And Dominic told him, his voice ice-cold and steady, that he had 3 seconds to let her go, and then he began to count. 1, 2. Dominic kept counting, his voice steady, his gray eyes locked on Victor like the gaze of a hunting animal waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Evelyn felt Victor's arm tighten around her throat, the gun trembling where it pressed against her temple. He was afraid. She could feel it in the frantic heartbeat pounding behind her, in the sweat dripping from his hand onto her shoulder. Victor Kane, the man who had threatened to do terrible things to her sister, the man who had laughed when she shivered in that freezing warehouse, was shaking with fear now. "Kill her!" Rick screamed from where he lay on the ground, his leg bent at a grotesque angle, blood from the wound on his head running down his face. "Kill her now, you idiot! What are you waiting for?" Victor hesitated, just for a second. 1 second he looked toward Rick. 1 second his finger loosened on the trigger. 1 second when Evelyn felt uncertainty ripple through his body, and 1 second was all Dominic needed. The gunshot cracked through the alley. Evelyn felt the arm around her neck go slack, heard Victor's scream of pain explode in her ear. His gun clattered to the ground with a sharp metallic ring. Victor fell backward, both hands clutching a shoulder that was spurting blood, his face twisting in agony. Evelyn did not think. She just ran toward Dominic, ran toward the arms opening for her, ran toward the only man in the world she trusted completely in that moment. She crashed into him, and he held her hard, as if she would vanish if he let go. The FBI surged in immediately. Marcus Webb led the team, swarming Victor as he groaned on the pavement, snapping cuffs onto him even as he bled. Rick's other men were taken down too, none of them daring to fight with FBI weapons on one side and Dominic's men on the other. But when Evelyn lifted her head from Dominic's chest, she saw Rick trying to crawl away, with a broken leg and blood streaming over his face. He was still dragging himself toward the end of the alley, where darkness might swallow him, where there might be one last thin chance to escape. Dominic released Evelyn and moved toward Rick, slow, deliberate, step by step, like an angel of death walking toward a guilty soul. He stopped beside Rick and looked down at the man at his feet with eyes cold as ice. Rick lifted his head, his face contorted with pain and terror. "We can make a deal," he rasped in desperation. "I have money, millions. I have information. I know secrets that could help you." Dominic said nothing. He only raised his pistol, the muzzle pointing straight at the center of Rick's forehead. Wait," Rick begged, tears mixing with blood on his face. "You can't kill me. The FBI is here. They'll arrest you." "You think I care?" Dominic said, his voice so cold Evelyn felt as if the temperature in the alley had dropped 10 degrees. "You touched what's mine. You threatened her sister. You made her cry." His finger tightened on the trigger. "I promised her I wouldn't kill you, but some promises are worth breaking." "Dominic," Evelyn shouted, running toward him. "Don't." Dominic did not turn, but he did not fire either. His finger stayed tense on the trigger, the gun still trained on Rick's forehead. The moment stretched, endless. The FBI stood frozen, none of them daring to intervene. Dominic's men stood still too, waiting for their boss, and Rick lay there trembling, urine spreading beneath him as he stared at the death hovering inches away. "Please," Evelyn said, softer now, stopping just behind Dominic. "Don't do this. Not for him. For you. For us." Dominic still did not look back, but Evelyn saw his shoulders sink a fraction, saw his finger slowly ease off the trigger. Then he lowered the gun. "For you," he said, his voice low and tired. "Only for you." He turned his back on Rick, walked to Evelyn, and gave Marcus Webb a single nod. "He's yours." The FBI moved at once, cuffing Rick and hauling him up despite his screams of pain from the broken leg. Evelyn did not look. She did not need to. Instead, she stepped into Dominic's arms, pressed her face to his chest, and for the first time in weeks she let herself cry. He held her tight, one hand stroking her hair, while around them red and blue lights flashed, radios crackled, voices shouted, and the chaos of an operation coming to an end filled the night. Yet inside Dominic's arms, Evelyn felt peace. She had survived. Rick Townsend had been arrested, and the man she loved had not become a killer for her. That was all that mattered in this moment. 3 months later, The trial of Richard Townsend officially began at the United States Federal Court in Chicago, and it felt as if the entire city was holding its breath as it watched. The media swarmed like vultures scenting a carcass, cameras flashing without rest, and Evelyn Hartley's name appeared on every front page beneath a nickname she never asked for and could not escape: the whistleblower who brought down an empire. Rick Townsend faced a list of charges so long the prosecutor needed nearly 20 minutes just to read them aloud: embezzling tens of millions of dollars from community projects, laundering money through overseas shell companies, kidnapping and unlawful confinement, conspiracy to commit murder, and the charge that made people in the courtroom go still: human trafficking, with evidence showing Rick had planned to sell young women to buyers overseas. Evelyn was called to the witness stand on the third day of the trial. She walked up with her head held high, no longer the trembling girl in a freezing warehouse 3 months earlier. She told everything: the first irregularities she found in the financial reports, the night Rick appeared in her office, the 48 hours of hell in the warehouse, and finally the fateful night at Le Bernardin. Her voice did not shake, her eyes did not flinch, and when Rick's attorney tried to destroy her credibility, tried to paint her as a disgruntled employee inventing a story, Evelyn answered with proof that could not be denied: the emails, the contracts, the bank statements, and the recording from that night. The recording the FBI recovered from a backup device Rick never knew existed. The evidence was so overwhelming Rick's lawyer could do nothing but sit there and watch his client sink deeper and deeper into the abyss. And there was more evidence, too, from an anonymous source whose identity the prosecution refused to reveal. Evidence of money laundering operations only an insider could have known. Evelyn knew exactly who that source was. She simply did not say it. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury needed only 4 hours to return a verdict: guilty, on every count. Richard Townsend was sentenced to 45 years in prison with no possibility of parole. Victor Kane received 25. And the wave of investigations that followed swept up a long line of corrupt officials Rick had bought over the years, from the police commissioner to members of the city council. As for Dominic Valenti, no charges were filed. The FBI stated that evidence of the Valenti family's involvement was not sufficient to prosecute. Evelyn knew that was a lie. She knew it was part of the unspoken bargain, the price of Dominic handing them the evidence that buried Rick. Part of her felt the injustice of it, that it was not true justice when one criminal was spared to catch another, but the other part of her, the part that had come to love Dominic Valenti against every shred of reason, felt only relief. When Rick was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he paused for a single second and turned his head to stare at Evelyn. His eyes burned with pure hatred, the kind that would never die until his final breath. But Evelyn was not afraid anymore. She met that stare with calm, with the gaze of someone who had walked through hell and come back stronger. Then she turned away, stepped out of the courtroom, and never looked back. "It's over," she whispered to herself as she passed through the courthouse doors, the Chicago spring sunlight greeting her like a promise of a new beginning. And at the bottom of the steps, amid reporters and onlookers, Evelyn saw a familiar face. Lily stood there, brown hair lifting in the wind, eyes shining with happy tears, arms wide open, waiting for her sister. Evelyn ran down the steps and threw herself into Lily's embrace, holding her as if afraid this was only a dream and she might wake at any second. "I missed you so much," Lily sobbed against her shoulder. "I know," Evelyn whispered, tears sliding down her own cheeks. "I missed you too. But everything is all right now. We're safe now." And for the first time in many long months, it was not a lie. 1 week after the trial, Evelyn returned to the penthouse one last time. She knew it the moment Dominic's message arrived, short and cold as always, yet carrying a low note she had learned to recognize. "We need to talk." Those 4 words were enough for her to understand what was coming. Dominic was standing by the glass wall when she walked in, staring out at Chicago stretched beneath the sunset the way he had so many times before. But there was something different in the way he held himself today, a deep weariness he was no longer trying to hide. "You're free now," Dominic said without turning, his voice calm but distant. "You can have a normal life now, a good life. No one will threaten you or Lily anymore." Evelyn stepped closer, her heart tightening as she began to understand where this conversation was headed. "What about us?" Dominic went silent. The pause that followed was long and painful, long enough for Evelyn to hear the sound of her own heart breaking piece by piece. Then he turned, and for the first time Evelyn saw the exhaustion in those gray eyes, the pain he no longer had the strength to conceal. "There is no us, Eve," he said, each word like a bullet through her heart. "There can't be." That's not your decision, Evelyn said, her voice trembling but firm. You don't get to decide for me. You know who I am, Dominic said, his voice hardening. The Valenti family won't disappear because Rick Townsend is in prison. I'm still the head of a criminal empire. I still have enemies everywhere. Every day beside me is a dangerous day for you, for Lily. He stepped closer, and Evelyn could see the war taking place behind his eyes. You deserve to live in sunlight, Eve. I live in the dark. That's where I belong, and I can't drag you down into it with me. Evelyn wanted to scream at him, wanted to say she did not care about danger, that she would face anything if it meant being with him, but when she looked into Dominic's eyes, she understood. He was not sending her away because he did not love her. He was sending her away because he loved her. Because he loved her too much to bear the thought of watching her get hurt because of him. Will I ever see you again? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Dominic looked at her, and in that moment the steel wall he kept around himself collapsed completely. He stepped in, lifted his hand, and touched her face one last time, his thumb brushing her cheekbone as if trying to memorize every line, every sensation. If you need me, he said, his voice rough with the emotion he was fighting to hold back. I'll be there, always. Then he bent and kissed her forehead. The kiss was soft, gentle, filled with pain and love and surrender. His lips resting there for a few seconds, as if he were trying to pour everything he could not say into that single touch. Goodbye, Evelyn Hartley, he whispered into her hair. Then he let go, turned away, and walked out. Evelyn wanted to call him back, wanted to run after him, wanted to take his hand and never let it go. But she did none of those things. She only stood there, watching Dominic's back as he moved through the doorway and vanished from her life. He did not look back. She knew he would not, because if he looked back, he would not be able to leave. Evelyn stood alone in the vast penthouse, the sunset staining everything around her, the color of blood. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. She understood now. Love does not always mean staying. Sometimes love means letting go so the person you love can be safe, can be happy, can live in the light they deserve. Dominic loved her in the only way he knew how, by letting her go. And maybe, Evelyn thought, as she stared out at Chicago sinking into darkness, it was the most painful and the purest kind of love she had ever been given. 2 years passed like a long, drifting dream. Evelyn Hartley was no longer the small, frightened accountant tucked into a corner of an office. She had become the founder and chief executive officer of the Hartley Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to protecting whistleblowers across the United States. Her office sat in a modest building in downtown Chicago, not far from the place where her life had changed forever 2 years earlier. Lily had graduated with highest honors and now worked beside her sister, leading communications and community outreach. The Hartley sisters, 2 orphans who once had nothing but each other, had built a refuge for people facing injustice the way they once had. Evelyn's book, telling the journey from an ordinary accountant to the whistleblower who brought down a corrupt empire, became a bestseller for 6 consecutive months. She was invited to speak at conferences, interviewed on television, and this spring she received the Courage in Journalism Award from the American Journalists Association. But for Evelyn, the most important things were not fame or awards. The most important things were the phone calls, like the one she received that afternoon, a young woman's voice trembling on the other end. Ms. Hartley? My name is Rachel. I'm 24, an accountant at a real estate company in Boston. I read your book, and I don't know what to do. I found out my boss is stealing from the employees' pension fund, but he has connections with powerful people, and I'm scared that if I speak up, I'll lose everything. Can you help me? Evelyn closed her eyes, and for a heartbeat she was back in that winter night 2 years ago, alone on the 15th floor, her heart racing as the progress bar crawled across her screen. She remembered the loneliness and the raw fear that had almost swallowed her. You're not alone, Rachel, Evelyn said, her voice warm and steady. I'll help you, step by step. We're going to get through this together. When she hung up, Lily came in with a cup of hot tea and a look that carried meaning. Another one? Another one, Evelyn said, nodding as she accepted the cup. Hey, have you seen the news? Lily asked, her voice careful. Rick Townsend died last night. Heart attack. In prison. Evelyn paused, the tea halfway to her lips. She waited for some emotion to arrive. Joy, satisfaction, even sadness. But nothing came. Only a calm emptiness, like closing the last chapter of a book she had finished long ago. A chapter closed, she said softly, and took a sip. That evening, Evelyn stayed late to finish paperwork. Lily had gone home, and the building was nearly empty when Evelyn locked up and stepped outside. The Chicago autumn air was cool, yellow leaves drifting across the sidewalk, and the streetlights cast everything in a warm gold that looked almost painted. Evelyn was searching her bag for her car keys when she saw it. A familiar black car parked at the curb, the kind of car she had not seen in 2 years but had never forgotten. Her heart missed a beat. Then the door opened, and Dominic Valenti stepped out. He looked different, not different in a bad way, different in a way Evelyn had never expected. His shoulders no longer carried that invisible weight she used to see. His gray eyes were no longer cold as steel. They were warmer, gentler. Even the scar on his face seemed faded, or maybe it was simply no longer the first thing she saw. 2 years, Dominic said, his voice low and familiar the way she remembered. But softer, too. I figured that was enough time to change everything. Change what? Evelyn asked, her voice far calmer than what was happening inside her. I stepped away, Dominic said, moving closer. I handed the family to someone else. I'm out now, Eve. Completely out. Evelyn searched his face for deception, for a reason not to believe him, but found nothing except raw honesty in those gray eyes. I didn't come to ask for a second chance, Dominic said, his voice turning rough. I just wanted you to know I thought about you. Every day, every single day, for the past 2 years. Evelyn looked at him, the man who had pulled her out of darkness, who had loved her enough to leave, who had spent 2 years becoming someone worthy of her, and she smiled. There's a coffee shop on the corner, she said. They're open until 10. Dominic stared at her, and something lit in his eyes that she had never seen before. Hope. Is that an invitation? It's a beginning. And they walked together under Chicago's streetlights, 2 silhouettes moving side by side along a sidewalk scattered with yellow leaves, toward the small coffee shop on the corner, where a new story was waiting to be written. Evelyn Hartley once believed that working hard was enough to be safe. She was wrong. But she also learned that sometimes fate does not push you into the dark to destroy you. It pushes you there so you can find the light you never knew you needed. And that is the story of Evelyn Hartley, a story of survival, of courage, of unexpected love blooming in the darkest places, a story that reminds us that no matter how black the night, dawn will always come, that no matter how alone you feel, there is always someone willing to take your hand. And that true love, the kind of love willing to sacrifice, willing to wait, willing to change, is the kind of love worth placing your whole faith in. If this story touched your heart, please share it with the people you love. Please hit the like button if you believe in second chances, in the power of courage, and in the miracle of love. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more moving stories updated every day. We would love to hear how you feel about this story. What do you think of Evelyn? Do you agree with Dominic's decision to leave 2 years ago? And if you were in Evelyn's place, what would you do? Leave a comment below and share what's in your heart. We read every comment and we truly want to hear your story. Finally, we wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Thank you for coming with us on Evelyn Hartley's journey. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.